When I rolled back into Bell Creek after my father's funeral, the town looked nothing like the place I left 15 years ago. Strip malls had replaced hayfields. Boutique coffee shops squatted where grain silos once stood. But what rattled me most wasn't the changes, it was the sameness. Row upon row of identical houses with plastic shutters and perfect lawns now surrounded the land my family had held for over a century. A Crosshorn Ranch, all 140 acres of it, was mine now. My father had spent his last breath ensuring it stayed that way, passing it to me with a weathered deed and a whispered warning. They're trying to take it, Easton. They already started. I didn't understand what he meant until I reached the southern fence line and found it gone. In its place was a paved cul-de-sac lined with luxury homes, complete with decorative street lamps and a carved wooden sign that read, Bell Vista, Phase 3. My father's pasture, the one where I'd ridden my first horse, was now someone's backyard. I stared at the development, stunned. No call. No letter. No sale. Just stolen land disguised as progress. I didn't have time to grieve. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived, sealed with embossed gold. It came from the Bell Vista Homeowners Association. Dear Mr. Cooper, our records indicate you are a resident within Bell Vista Phase 3. Your property is not in compliance with current community standards. Fines totaling $247,955.76 are due within 60 days. Failure to comply may result in further legal action, including lien placement. I reread it 3 times, sure I'd misunderstood.
Fines?
For what? Having a barn. For not manicuring my dirt driveway? They cited a list of violations that included unauthorized livestock, non-standard fencing, and aesthetically disruptive structures. That disruptive structure was my grandfather's hay barn, built by hand in 1912. They even accused my chickens of being a noise nuisance. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, fists clenched around the receiver. Bell Vista HOA. This is Marla. Came a clipped voice, polished and cold. This is Easton Cooper, I said. I just got a notice about fines? There's been some mistake. Silence. Then a polite cough.
Oh.
You're that property. Her tone changed, condescending, amused. Mr. Cooper, your land falls within the incorporated border of Bell Vista Phase 3. All homeowners must comply. I never agreed to join your HOA. That's my ranch. It's been in my family for over 100 years. According to the county zoning office, it's part of our development now. You're subject to the same rules as everyone else. I'm not in your development, I snapped. You built into my land. A pause. Then a soft chuckle. You should take that up with the county, Mr. Cooper. In the meantime, the fines stand. You have 60 days. She hung up before I could reply. The rage hit slowly, like a fire crawling across dry grass. They didn't just want my land. They wanted to bury my history under pink stucco and patio furniture. I drove straight to the county records office, slamming the HOA letter onto the desk of a clerk named Dylan. Young, jittery, and wearing an outdated tie, he looked nervous before he even opened the file drawer. Crosshorn Ranch, I said. It's supposed to be one parcel. Been that way since 1886. He pulled up a digital map and frowned. Well, part of it was rezoned 5 years ago. For residential development. Rezoned by who? He clicked around. Looks like a petition from Bell Vista Holdings. Approved in a special zoning session. Fast-tracked. Let me see the signatures. He hesitated, then printed a copy. My father's signature was there, but he never signed it. And I had the medical records to prove his hands hadn't held a pen in the last 2 years of his life. They'd forged it. They'd carved into Crosshorn Ranch with legal sleight of hand, buried it in bureaucracy, and now had the gall to charge me for resisting. I stepped out into the thick Texas heat, gripping the counterfeit document like a live snake. My father wasn't paranoid, he was right. They were coming for everything. And they thought I'd just sit back and let them. They were wrong. Dead wrong. By sunrise the next morning, I was sitting in the office of Sullivan and Trent, attorneys at law. The space smelled like old leather and defiance. Mr. Wallace Sullivan, my father's longtime lawyer, leaned forward behind a desk as solid and stubborn as the man himself. "They forged it," I said, laying down the zoning petition. He slid on his glasses and examined it wordlessly. A moment later, he nodded once, sharp and grim. "This is fraud," he said. "Crude, but just good enough to fool the county clerk." "My dad couldn't even sign his name by then," I muttered. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "And they used it to rezone nearly 40 acres of Crosshorn into Belle Vista? Without notifying him? Without offering compensation?" I nodded. "And now they've got the nerve to fine me for refusing to play along." He sat back, folding his hands like a chess master about to strike. "Then we'll take this to war." Over the next 2 weeks, we gathered ammunition, land deeds, tax assessments, dated aerial photos, and medical records proving my father's physical incapacity during the alleged signing. Each document was another nail in the HOA's coffin. Meanwhile, the pressure escalated. Every day brought a new violation notice, most of them absurd. One cited me for failure to landscape the north pasture. Another claimed the cattle posed psychological stress to adjacent homeowners. My favorite? Visible hay bales from Phase 3 backyards. Then, on a blistering Thursday afternoon, Greg Turlow arrived.
He didn't call.
Didn't knock. Just rolled onto my driveway in a black Escalade, the kind of vehicle that screamed least power. He stepped out in loafers and a linen blazer like he'd just walked off a golf course. Behind him stood 2 HOA board members, matching clipboards, matching scowls. "You Easton Cooper?" Greg asked, offering a smile too wide and too white. I stepped off the porch, boots crunching gravel. I'm Greg Turlow, HOA president for Belle Vista. Thought I'd drop by, man to man. Clear the air." I said nothing. He glanced around the ranch like he was appraising it. "You've got a rustic setup here. It's a working ranch."
Right.
"Right." He clicked his tongue. "Look, we understand this whole transition hasn't been easy. A lot of change, a lot of paperwork. But we're here to help. By fining me $250,000? He gave a practiced laugh. "That's just administrative stuff. Once we're all on the same page, we can clear that up." "I'm not on your page." Greg's smile twitched. "Easton, you're part of our community now. That means shared rules. Shared vision." "I didn't buy into your community," I snapped. "You built your homes on my land. You're the outsider here." His eyes hardened. "The survey says otherwise." I pulled the 1886 deed from my back pocket and held it up like a badge. "This says you're standing on my great-great-grandfather's property." He didn't even look at it. "You can waive the fines," he said, voice low and smooth. "But if you keep pushing, you'll end up in court. And, I promise, we have deeper pockets." I stepped forward, nose to nose. "You think that scares me? I've buried 2 generations of men on this land. You think I'm afraid of a subdivision full of imported palm trees?" The board members shifted uncomfortably. Greg's mask cracked for just a moment, enough for me to see the panic behind the polish. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his Escalade. Gravel sprayed as he peeled away. I stood there a long while, the sun sinking behind the ridge. In the silence, I heard cattle lowing and wind whispering through the mesquite, sounds my family had listened to for over a century. They thought I was just another landowner too broke or broken to fight back. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Next step? Make the whole damn town hear what they'd done. 3 weeks later, I stood before the Bell County Zoning Board in a starched shirt and dusty boots, gripping a folder that weighed more than it should. Behind me sat a small but growing crowd, ranchers, old neighbors, even a few curious Belle Vista residents. And in the front row, flanked by 2 sharp-suited attorneys, sat Greg Turlow, smug as a fox in a henhouse. I'd spent the last 2 weeks doing nothing but digging. I'd found the original boundary markers, rusted iron rods buried beneath 6 inches of crabgrass where the new homes now sat. I'd spoken to a retired surveyor who remembered mapping Crosshorn Ranch before GPS ever touched the job. And with Sullivan's help, I'd obtained security footage from a notary who, under pressure, admitted she'd never witnessed my father's forged signature. Sullivan rose first, addressing the board with calm precision. Ladies and gentlemen, we submit clear evidence that 40 acres of Crosshorn Ranch were illegally annexed through a fraudulent rezoning petition. We present the medical records, dated topographical maps, and the affidavit from the notary, all confirming that the petition was forged and submitted without the knowledge or consent of the legal property owner. He handed over the folder, the same one that had taken weeks of sweat, dirt, and late-night calls to assemble. The chairman, a man named Hal Granger with a chin like a cinder block, flipped through it slowly. Greg stood. With respect, he said, oozing politeness, Bella Vista acted on documents officially filed and approved by the county. Our builders received legal permits. We followed every step required by law. Hal looked up. Even if those steps began with fraud? Greg hesitated for half a breath. If there was fraud, and I'm not admitting there was, it happened before we were involved. We're simply maintaining what we were granted. I rose, walking to the center of the room. The tension thickened like fog. My father couldn't hold a fork the last year of his life, I said. He didn't sign anything. You built on stolen land. And then you tried to fine me for living on it. Gasps rippled through the room. I didn't pick this fight. You all brought it to my door. But I'm not leaving. My great-great-grandfather ran cattle here before Texas had zip codes. You think I'm going to let a couple of spreadsheets erase that? A murmur of approval stirred behind me. Hal looked at Greg. We'll need a recess to verify these materials. Greg's attorneys leaned in urgently. One whispered something. Greg's face twitched. I'd like to propose a settlement, he said suddenly. Off the record. Sullivan stood. Mr. Cooper isn't interested in hush money. Greg's gaze found mine, less smug now, more calculating. This could drag on for months. Maybe years. Even if you win, you'll be buried in red tape. I've got time, I said. And unlike you, I'm not the one trespassing. He sat down hard, face pale. When the board recessed, I stepped outside into the humid air, heart hammering. I didn't need a gavel to know the tide had turned. The crowd followed, forming clusters along the courthouse steps. One of the ranchers clapped me on the back. You showed him, Easton, he said. Hell of a speech. Another man, balding with thick glasses, stepped forward hesitantly. I live in Phase 3. Didn't know the whole story. Thought the HOA was protecting us. Protecting you from hay bales and chickens? I asked. He winced. I just want to raise my kids somewhere safe. Didn't realize we weren't squatters. You didn't know, I said. Now you do. He nodded and walked off, thoughtful. I looked up at the courthouse windows, where I imagined Greg Turlow pacing like a rat in a trap. He thought I'd fold, that I'd take a check and ride off into the sunset while they paved my legacy into cul-de-sacs. But Crosshorn wasn't for sale. And this fight wasn't over. Not until they gave back every inch they'd taken. 2 months later, the ruling came down like thunder over dry plains. The Bell County Zoning Board, after extensive investigation and 2 public hearings, declared the rezoning of Crosshorn Ranch null and void. The forged petition was legally vacated, the developers' permits were rescinded, and a quiet order began to ripple through the neighborhood. Pack up or prepare for litigation. Greg Turlow tried to spin it, of course. He held a press conference under the HOA's gazebo, flanked by flustered board members and visibly anxious homeowners. We've been caught in a bureaucratic misfire, he announced, and we're exploring legal remedies to retain the integrity of Bella Vista. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Not anymore. The local news had picked up the story. Headlines screamed, Rancher proves neighborhood was built on inherited land. There was even drone footage, my land laid out like a chessboard of misplaced pieces, homes rising on what once were grazing fields. The internet loved it. I became the quiet cowboy who outmaneuvered a whole HOA. Yet I wasn't interested in fame. I wanted justice. Sullivan filed suit within a week of the board's decision. The claim? Trespassing, damages, and illegal use of private property. We demanded $10 million in restitution. Bella Vista's developers folded fast. Their insurers wanted nothing to do with a rancher who had proof, witnesses, and public sympathy on his side. They settled out of court for $6.4 million, plus full title and control over the disputed 40 acres. The HOA? They were evicted. One by one, the McMansions went dark. For sale signs lined the pristine sidewalks like tombstones. The iron gates were dismantled. The swimming pool was drained. And on a warm October afternoon, I walked through the center of what used to be Phase 1, now silent but for the wind. That's when I saw him, Greg, loading boxes into the back of his Escalade. No entourage. No clipboard warriors. Just a man in a wrinkled suit, sweat on his collar, and defeat in his bones. He saw me. I almost kept walking. Almost. But I stopped. He straightened up, as if pretending dignity would rebuild his life. "I hope you're happy," he said flatly. I nodded. "I am." "You ruined an entire community." "No, Greg. You did. I just made sure you paid for it." He looked away, jaw tight. "I read your bio once," I added. "Said you built communities with vision and integrity. Guess you left both of those in the glove box." That one landed. He shut the hatch and drove off, slower than I expected. No gravel spray. No smirk in the mirror. Just a man driving away from something he'd never truly owned. In the weeks that followed, I took down the vinyl fences, planted mesquite and wildflower seeds where the sidewalks had been. Let the grass reclaim what had always been hers. The ranch breathed again. But I didn't erase everything. I turned one of the larger homes, the one that used to be the HOA's community office, into a youth AG center. We brought in local 4-H clubs, taught kids about soil, livestock, and the old ways of stewardship. The irony wasn't lost on me. The place built to control the land now taught others how to care for it. One evening, as the sun slid behind the hills and painted everything in gold, I stood at the fence line with my mother. She'd come out from her place in Lubbock to see it for herself. "Your father would have been proud," she said softly. I nodded. "He always said land remembers." She smiled. "And land forgives, eventually." As we turned to walk back, I looked once more at the ridgeline beyond Bella Vista. Untouched, ancient, and still ours. I hadn't just won a legal fight. I'd reclaimed a legacy. And made damn sure no one would ever steal it again.